Good afternoon. Thank you everyone for coming. I'd like to thank the people who invited me, all the people who have taken care of me here and in the past. This is my third time of being part of CANactions. I came for the first time 3 years ago. I was here 2 years ago. I took last year off for undescribable reasons, and I'm back this year, and it's quite an honor. So with that, I'll start my presentation. Okay, so first of all, as stated, I am Jason Hilgefort. I work at an office called Maxwan, which is located in Rotterdam in the Netherlands. And I also have started my own office, L+CC, Land and Civilization Compositions. So I'll speak mostly about Maxwan and the works I've participated in there. And at the end, I'll talk a little bit about some recent work that I do with this kind of side project I have. But with that, let's begin. So Maxwan. You don't need to read this long description. What's important is the last sentence, which says, Maxwan architects and urbanists seeks to merge cultural, technical, and aesthetic influences into an inextricable and beautiful whole. What that means is you could translate it as we get really excited about boring things. Things that other people maybe overlook, such as property lines or infrastructural systems or zoning regulations. These things we find exciting, and we like to do a lot of research, and sometimes they lead the project. These sometimes are our passion. And also in our design process, you could say we always struggle between a few different ways, between trying to do something original or something common, something rare or universal. There's always this balance between the work that makes it actually quite difficult for us. And the range of the work in terms of size is a very broad range, from extremely large to extremely small. For example, we did a master plan for a community outside of Moscow, which was 6,000 hectares. And we also have done a single-family home, which I can show you, which was only 100,000 square meters. So that's a difference of designing for 300,000 people or designing for 2. So the range of the work of the office is quite diverse. And this also obviously brings challenges in terms of how to think, because it's not a very singular way in terms of how you relate to the client. When you design a house, you design it for maybe 2 people. It's a very personal relationship. I know them, I maybe know their kids, I probably even know their dog. But when you're designing an urban master plan, you're basically often designing for strangers and maybe the politicians or developers that will sell it to them later. So in that case, you inherently don't know your client, and it makes it a very strange process. So it's a bit of a guesswork, and there's this range in between. But in the end, despite all these kind of boring, obvious things I said, for us, this actually becomes our passion. These boring things that get us excited actually bring us joy. In the end, we're just like anyone else who's creative. We just like to do what gets us excited, and it makes us have fun at the end of the day. So it's in some ways actually that simple in the end. And I'll go through a few kind of just ideas, things we thought about, parts of projects, and I'll show some projects really fast, and some a bit more slow and in-depth, and I've tried to bond them together with a few things we thought about while doing them. And in this case, when designing nature or parks, sometimes the most important thing you can do is to think about infrastructure or roads. So you need to think about the green before you think about the gray. One example is a project where is starting under construction, a small park outside of Brussels in Belgium. We did a master plan for the whole community, but that's not important. The park I'll be talking about is there, a very small dot. And moving into a much more reasonable scale, this is the way the park currently looks. It's a typical residential, suburban neighborhood, nothing too special, quite boring, to be honest. But you can see the park is very much dominated by roads. But we obviously thought, well, that's boring, let's think of something different. So conceptually, we thought, what if we made the entire thing grass pretty obvious for a park. And we kind of cut the grass to make room for places for people to walk and to pave. But in order to do something as simple as that, we need to be very intelligent and very sharp in terms of how we work with traffic laws, with the local traffic engineers. Because of the realities of this road and the research we did, we discovered in the negotiations with the city that we could cut off this road connection for cars, and similarly for a road connection that was here. And we also had to do a bit of adventure so this guy could get to his garage. But in doing this, and doing all this research ahead of time, we could make clearly the residential, the walk paths, the priority in here with the green spaces in between. And create environments that start to feel like this, with much more wild nature, kind of nice recreational place to be. And also another reality we had to deal with was on site, there was a small brick structure for electrical infrastructure. Doesn't matter, a small brick building that's incredibly ugly had to stay. But we took it as an opportunity. What if we took that idea of the brick building and we just make it part of our design? So you can see here, it in the distance, we turned it into kind of a brick icon. It looks like the brick of the path kind of comes up into it, and you can see it here as well. We just kind of merge it into our language, and it helped us think about what the brick paving pattern was for the walkways. We took it as an opportunity. Okay, switching locations, even further north, Helsinki. The project is called Stadi Terrace, which means city terrace. It's a competition we won there. And if you know about Helsinki, it's very well situated on the water, has a rich tradition in terms of its harbors. And so the city is very much defined by its harbors. And the city center is here, and the site was this historic harbor here. And it was an ideas competition when we were taking part in it. And the question was, what do we do with this area? It's historic, it's significant, it's an icon of the place. There are many beautiful buildings around, historic, beautiful churches. But the shipping industry is fantastic because it brings a lot of people to the area, but it also has a lot of consequences. These tourist boats, kind of cruise ships, have a lot of security realities. They need fences, they need a lot of parking space. So the impact it has on the public space is incredible. The amount of space where people can actually get close to the water is extremely limited. So you can see here, to summarize, in this incredibly large space, the purple represents the amount of waterfront that's fenced, where citizens can't get to the water. And the small little patch represents where people can actually get close to the water. So this is inherently something we wanted to change. But of course, to do that, to just say I want more public space, requires really understanding the shipping industry. So sure, let's increase the public space, let's get rid of the parking and less space for these boats. But that requires understanding the 700 different levels of the shipping industry, the realities of the trucks that want to deliver them, understanding their docking realities, where they want to be, their requirements, their loading issues, how trucks get to them through the city. All of these things came first before we did the pretty renderings that I'll show at the end. But all of this allowed us to come to a few very simple principles. We actually could rearrange the way the boats work to be more clustered, more grouped. We actually made it more efficient. We made it so large trucks no longer had to go through the city center. This allowed us to increase public open space, as I spoke about, to bring in more trees. It also is something that's going to happen over time. This is still a very active, very successful port. This is not one of these historical ports that is failing. This one is quite successful. So this is a long-term, maybe 50-year strategy of how the port can pull back and allow space. So we also need to understand how the phasing of that can work in time. This is expensive, what we're suggesting. And shifting, once we make that, okay, that's nice, so we've got more space. But there's a lot of beautiful parks in the city. We also need to think about how those parks are part of something larger than just our space. So understanding, yes, there's quite nice parks, as I said, but here, this parkway here comes into our site, and our site started here and started to go around here. So a basic principle of understanding that we wanted to form this cultural axis, or cultural cross, if you prefer, to link our site into the existing public space of the city. We studied a lot of other public spaces around the world to get a better understanding, because this is a lot of public space we're talking about, and it became about, if you're going to add this much public space, you have to think about the kind of activities you want to have there. How do you program it? What do people do there? So that became a key part of it. What all do we put in? How do we make the space diverse and flexible, but still have many events? Image here, you can see the changed state. But zooming in a bit, you can see this space here is for a historic market, which has been going on for hundreds of years, so had to remain. It's beautiful, it's a classic market situation, it's nice, you can have some fruits and meat and all of that, which is wonderful. But of course the reality is that these sorts of markets often take a significant amount of parking, and maybe it isn't the most nicely designed space in terms of how you react to the water. So we wanted to change this space here and make it more of an amphitheater towards the water, a place to sit, a nice dock, instead of here where you're at the edge and you don't even realize where the water is, to give a slight slope down so you can see the water instead of just looking at cars. A city terrace, as we called the project. And then also another absolute fact is, much like here, Finland is extremely cold in the winter, so for 6 months, if not 8 months of the year, the public space is basically unusable, so the market cannot function. So, pretty obvious solution. Let's provide a structure where the market can have a market hall interior, shown here. An interior market hall that can also have some interaction with the waterfront, have a feeling of open space. And then additionally on the other side of the park, at the time they were talking to the Guggenheim about potentially having a museum, or maybe not the Guggenheim, but another museum. So they were wondering where to place it. This was part of the question for the competition. And there's a beautiful hill adjacent to the site next to a very not so pleasant area. Beautiful place to sit, maybe see the water, but again, you can't touch the water. It's cut off by this roadway here. So the thought was pretty simple. We can just take this hill, which is already risen, obviously, and pull people directly off the hill straight towards the water, and actually provide direct access to the top of the Guggenheim, provide maybe a sculpture park, and provide another large terrace onto the city and a better connection to the water, as you can see here, and a place for it to spill out. And the entire composition, we think, adds up to a series of varied spaces that provides activity. But again, the key part here was thinking about the gray before the green again. How do we how do we handle the infrastructure before we're thinking about where to put the Guggenheim? Okay, very simple idea. Architecture, of course, is many thoughts, many ideas. We didn't invent this, but of course, a building in many ways can just be a showcase of the users itself and not necessarily be about the architecture. So this is a project we proposed in Taiwan. It's another large harbor redevelopment. And I can talk about all the site things we did, but again, I want to just talk about this short. The general idea was this was supposed to be a new cultural center, both a place where people could perform music, practice music, have concerts, art galleries. They had a ridiculously large program, which is also why we have a ridiculously large building. But that's why we thought the beautiful thing about art or design is actually the process itself and the performance. An event like this is nice for you to come and listen to me talk, but for me, that's the least interesting part, is to hear someone talk about design. It's interesting to see the real process, especially musicians working or things like this. So we wanted to treat the entire building as a showcase of what's going on inside, as you can see here with this sketch. Just the idea that the public, it could be a big billboard for the creative industry in Taiwan, which they were trying to showcase. So this was our driving factor. But again, to do that, you need to be extremely strategic about where the elevator cores are, how to arrange the building, the structural systems, how do you deal with the facade, because most concert halls do not like to get sun in them. They like to have other lights upon you. And then they could give this amazingly rich experience. So when you are seeing a concert, you could imagine seeing a rock concert and then being able to see the city skyline in the background, We thought it would be possible to have a green garden on top for sustainability reasons, but obviously this could be a large gift back to the community to have a green space overlooking the city. Even just something as simple as the reality that you would need a staircase to move up through the museum. You could use the bottom side of the staircase to be basically a series of mirrors to create this dizzying facade where you could see actually inside the museum from the outside. And then from this main performance plaza that we created, that we thought people could just kind of play and do as they wish, we wanted to have this kind of informal performances be able to happen on the plaza and related immediately to the more formal things going on inside, this kind of almost direct, strange relationship between audience and performers. House N, this is a house, a small villa, okay, not that small, in the Netherlands. And they had a fairly nice house already in a nice traditional Dutch neighborhood with very nice, respectable old villas. So we wanted to bring something fresh because they didn't want to design a new building, but they wanted to do a renovation. So something fresh, yet still wanting to respect the character of the building as it exists, and especially respect the neighborhood, not try too hard to stand out as architects. We didn't need to make a purple building. But in a very simple way, this was also a bit about showcasing. You can see a bit in plan here, but it's easier to see in section. It became just about accentuating the living space, and really about three things. About opening up a central space for the stairs, about extending the living room out to the garden, and just extending the kitchen to make the kitchen feel like you're in the front yard. And then you can start to see here, it just gives this much more natural relationship. Still respecting the old buildings, not trying too hard to stick out, but making it so when you're inside the building, you're not so sure if you're inside or outside, perhaps. And then with the stair in the middle, because of the realities of being able to use a laser cutter to cut steel, the handrail, we could design in any way we wanted. So we wanted to, one, take into account some structural realities, that it wanted to be denser at the bottom and maybe lighter at the top. And two, we wanted to have fun with an old pattern. I mean, it's a bit of a traditional pattern. Well, it's definitely a traditional pattern. But we wanted to do something that wouldn't have been possible with that pattern in the past. And historic patterns, actually for the craftsman, it has to repeat. It can't have a warp to it. So we wanted this pattern, kind of as it went up, to start to do something it couldn't do before. It gives this lightness and sense of tradition to the space, but then there's also this sense as you rise up that there's something more contemporary going on there as well. And then for the kitchen, we wanted to do something that was massive. So we wanted it to be tied to the house and still respect the neighborhood, but we wanted something much more forceful, much more of its own object. So it didn't even necessarily need to be one house, but the kitchen in and of itself wanted to be an object. Plus it was just incredible to go to the factory and work with the concrete formakers who made this. So with this simple piece, we formed the kitchen, looking out to the front yard, that makes it really feel like you're not necessarily inside your house. Maybe you're at a kitchen that's in your garden. Maybe you can just enjoy the sun a bit nicer than usual. And it just sticks out, fits into the building. It's clearly a new addition, but it's not trying too hard to prove that we as architects did something new. And a nice place for the client. Inefficient spaces can be extremely efficient. There always needs to be a place to hang out, a place to work, a place to do this and that, but sometimes a bit of leftover is the best thing you can do as an architect, to be efficient enough with the rest of the building so that you can allow for something more exciting to happen spatially. Perforum, which is a mixture of performance and forum, was a competition we entered in Tallinn in Estonia. You can see here it's reasonably close to the center of the city. In reality, it was a series of dance, art. It was a bunch of design things again. There was a music studio, an auditorium, a ballet school, and all of these schools were going to be glued together. So they all need their own facilities, they all have their own realities, they all have their own distinct needs. So how do we do that and still give them a sense of cohesion, because they used to be separate schools? So a very simple idea. Literally take a few buildings, but give them each their own building, and then glue them to this kind of stomach-shaped space in the middle where they could all fall out into and hang out. And in that kind of stomach, or you'll see banana-shaped space, we thought there was an opportunity with the buildings pressed against it that you could have little windows to see to what's going on inside. So if I'm studying at the ballet school, I might be able to see someone who's studying at the art school. And so we can get an interaction and a communication. You can see the abstract shape here. Yeah, it looks like bananas, or one banana with a block glued to it. And then we have to rearrange these spaces in terms of formal realities. This creates a series of also smaller spaces between the buildings, above the buildings, aside of the buildings. You can see in a space like this, adjacent to the library, a nice place to maybe go outside and read a book on some of the few times when it's nice weather in Tallinn. And you can see here from the street there's a hint of the banana, as we chose to call it, spilling out onto the street with the spaces adjacent to it. But in the end, you could say the entire project was about this very inefficient space that we wanted like this. So here you can see what we dreamed of, what we got excited about. This big, long, almost classical archway space connecting the schools with windows onto other spaces, stairways that even intentionally protrude, stick out into the space. A nice place to hang out, maybe play an instrument, maybe dance, maybe just drink a coffee, something like this. Okay, staying in Northern Europe, there's a lot of Northern Europe projects. Helsinki, Finland, another competition we did for Aalto University. Aalto University is a historic campus. The original campus was designed by Alvaro Aalto, a very famous Finnish architect. But the campus is old, but the university is new, because they are gluing a few universities together. And so this new Aalto University says their motto is about technology, business, and design all being together. But then the vision for this competition, the campus center, was the idea of urban life and design, was what they talked about. But we thought their vision was a bit incomplete, that really they needed the technology, the business, the design, the urban life, landscape, and a place to live all in this campus center, that the entire university should be represented in this new campus center that they were calling for. And also in that diversity, we thought the landscapes should be represented. This is a campus on an extremely beautiful piece of land. When Alvaro Aalto originally designed it, it was chosen because it's such a beautiful landscape. His buildings were placed because of the landscape. But in the reality over the years as it has evolved, that landscape was a bit of a modernist sort of landscape, which meant all grass and kind of boring. But the reality of the surroundings were very rich, so we wanted to create more rich, more diverse spaces in terms of landscape as well. But in doing that, we need to be very smart about how to handle the parking. But being smart about the parking allows us to pull some of these existing landscape typologies into our site here in this weird kind of bent X shape. And in that space, even there, the buildings can be representative of different people, but even the landscapes themselves can be representative of different places and different qualities. We also had to protect long views. There's a lot of historic buildings there, about half of them designed by Aalto, so we wanted our building to be respectful, to still maintain the views of his historic, beautiful buildings. We wanted to add more varied program, as I said, and a variety of green space. But we wanted it all to tie into the campus, as we hope it looks like here. You can see the visual quality from an aerial. And you can see from the ground, one thing we wanted to do, the campus had a tradition of having brick buildings. We thought that brick was beautiful, but we thought we could use it on the ground surface. So that became the paving surface of the project that we proposed, whereas the buildings themselves were not necessarily brick. This is actually, we were suggesting a stained concrete, and this was actually a metal building. So trying to match the color, but actually trying to use much more contemporary contemporary materials. Because Aalto, when he did it, actually, he chose brick because he thought it represented industrial. And now it's changed, as identity does change over time, and now people think it's about the brick. But actually what he believed in was industry and the mixing of industry and education. And this was the key to our project, actually going back to the original vision for the campus. But maybe the key part of the project was the design school. Another design school, I know. But again, they had this wasn't a different series of design schools. It was an architecture school as well as design and media and film, but they had been together for a while. But of course, within that, you have different programs. There's a need for classrooms. There's a need for the professors to have a place to work. There's a place to eat and to hang out and have a library. And there was the performance hall, let's say. But we thought, again, a bit, how about we take all of those things that are inherently in all of these buildings, all of these programs, and we put them on the ground floor to create a really active base to hang out, and also one that's inside. Again, this is Helsinki, extremely cold in the winter. Most times during school, it's quite cold, so you want something protected. You can see a bit of the programming here, creating a space to move through the middle, so you could even move through the middle of the site, with a library, some studio space, a place to eat, all on the ground floor, all connected. With some more efficient buildings on top having their own kind of space and their own quality, a courtyard, a winter garden, a lobby. But forming this one kind of single gesture as we saw it. Connected to the public space, the building can spill outside. You can see here from the main entryway, this is an extremely famous Aalto building that we wanted to make sure and allow our building to almost direct us towards, but still allow in that a large pane of glass so you can see into this kind of creative hangout place. And then a nice sun-filled space underneath this kind of more industrial roof where you could go to the library or you could have a coffee or perhaps you could do some work, to allow a few things to happen, but definitely a place to hang out. And you can see how it fits into the campus here in terms of the brick quality as we spoke about. Okay, so architecture, often everyone wants to talk about buildings, but the first thing sometimes you need to do is to think about what is actually between the building. So we were asked by, that says Gelendzhik, Russia, on the Black Sea. We were asked by a Russian developer to come up with a vision for essentially a place for young Russians, probably roughly your age, to go on spring break, like American spring break. So to go drink and party for a week when school is out. So kind of a fun commission to deal with. Near Gelendzhik, which is located here, airport, and the site was here along the Black Sea. But the site is beautiful, but the topography, or the hills, are extremely difficult. So there's beautiful forests, there's a lovely cliff looking out over the sea, an amazing waterfront edge, and of course the sea itself is extraordinarily beautiful. So all of that was great that we had this beautiful landscape, but what do you do on a site that's so perfect in many ways that you almost don't want to touch it? And it's also incredibly difficult to build on. And it's also incredibly dangerous to put roughly 10,000 drunk Russians on steep topography. So there were a few core obvious ideas to the project. One was to just obviously provide views out to the sea. We can treat the building as a series of terraces going down. We could almost have these almost dacha-like spaces where you could really be kind of in amongst the trees on a very small scale so you could still feel like you're in nature. But maybe key is kind of these two principles here, this cozy valley or comfortable valley space was the idea that literally if you wanted to be in a more far out space, more quiet with nature, you and others still could all come down to this valley space as a place to hang out if you want to meet girls, or if you want to dance, or if you just want to get drunk all by yourself. All of these things are completely an option, but all in one kind of singular spine, as you can see here, a strong network. So there's a loose network to move between, but there's definitely a central space. And of course we can pick super beautiful images of what it could be like Greece or any other incredible spaces in the world. We can all dream. But the key principle was how we organized this space in many ways, because it had to be very functional. You have to deliver goods You're hoping that the young people that are there won't kill themselves. And so you have to have a series of spaces where they can hang out and meet that maybe have a different kind of program and maybe a big event space at the end, but all along one spine, which also makes transport much more easy, and has a visual quality like this. It looks like something we can all imagine doing with Photoshop, a very pixelated image, so it's kind of concentrated in the middle and starts to disperse on the edge so that each student could kind of have their option of how they wanted to stay. And we even use the Odessa steps as a reference. And we imagined a space like this, with a rope line connecting it, also to make it easier to move up and down the space, but a series of terrace spaces with bars, cafes, and restaurants spilling out onto some of these spaces, connecting up to the adjacent private dwellings. And then also the key is how to think of this network, because also it's 20-year-old girls, and they're Russian, they're all gonna wear high heels. So then you have to think about how to design stairs in an incredibly safe way. These girls should not be going up and down kind of the hills. So it's thinking of how to form the stairs. This network of stairs could even be slides, it could be more concrete paths, but it could have its own architectural quality in and of itself. The stairway itself actually becomes a stronger piece of architecture than the residential units themselves. So it also makes it easy for the guy to bring beer back to or maybe vodka. That's a lot of vodka. But to bring that back to his house, so it makes it a very safe thing. And also, I mean, all of this I'm saying a bit in fun, but also very natural in that the less you touch the ground, obviously, it's better for the nature. So the nature of the place could stay. This is something that, well, the Russian client didn't care at all, but we were very concerned. This was an extremely beautiful site. To be honest, if you ask my real opinion, you shouldn't build there. But so we wanted the buildings to touch the ground as little as possible so that hopefully the nature could stay. And also so the buildings could stay, even though the Russian client wasn't so aware, if you cover all the ground, that's going to affect how the water drains. The earth is going to have a likeliness to move if something happens, especially in a rainfall. So this also was a key aspect of the project. How do we keep the nature that is there as much as possible? And of course, a view from the Black Sea, which, yeah, looks exciting. Okay, next project is in Paphos, in Cyprus. We call it Network. You can see Cyprus here. But the site itself, you can see Paphos is there. The airport is here, and the site is in between. It was a competition. They were asking for people to come up with ideas for what this space could be. It was one of the few spaces left because the city is growing. Tourism is popular there because Cyprus is absolutely beautiful and a great place to have a good time. But the city was growing, and the architectural tradition of the community was being taken away. But a lot of the people might want to come there and actually understand some of the local cultures and some of the local events. And some of the people who live there might still want to learn how to make a basket in a more traditional way or how to grow some of the crops. So our idea was this idea of agriculture, so the culture of agriculture, we thought could be the idea of the center. So this space here, which looks incredibly unexciting, and looks less exciting is here. But the idea in many ways was very simple. There's a few historic buildings that still remain, which I'll talk about in a bit, that form a bit of a square, but we wanted to reach out to some of the adjacent uses that were off the site and try and pull some of those uses in the site. There was a place to do sports next to the site. There was libraries, there were churches. So we wanted the site to connect to some of the existing context and take advantage of it. You can see the site plan here. And here you can start to see some of the buildings. They're not actually that historic. You'll notice they're not exactly architectural masterpieces. In Greece, there's many beautiful buildings. These are not one of them. They were actually built by Germans. This nicely photoshopped and photographed image makes them look much more exciting than they are. But they are still beautiful. in some way and trace the history, which we obviously value. But we wanted to play with that a bit. And what you can see here in these diagrams is we thought there was an opportunity, since different buildings were in different states of quality, that in some cases we could actually use what was the historic building to make something outside. Sometimes it could be a standard enclosure. Sometimes the building could just be used to make something completely outside. And of course, we could use it to recreate a new structure. So we wanted to make it, so as you'll see in this image here, you can see it in the plans as well. But you can see in the image that there would be moments where you as a visitor wouldn't really be sure what was inside and what was outside before, to kind of mix up that spatial experience, to give something new. And this is maybe the most important part of the project, I would argue. When they called for this, they assumed it would be some kind of cultural center to draw people. And if you want to be really honest with yourself, the most efficient way possible to do that is do one big building, shove it all in there, build it all at once, and then you have it. It's very cheap. But because of the way we thought about the site, because of the way we thought it should be, we thought that was absolutely the wrong thing to do. So you can see our little black X there. We think this site has always been about nature, about relating to the land, and about much more of a smaller scale. So in our opinion, this was the right approach, a series of small buildings, much like the buildings that were there. And another good trick we have, which looks cool in the renderings, but also is a really functional trick, was the area was a former agricultural area. And in that area, it was very traditional. At times, you had to cover the agriculture with a fine net to protect the plants from the sun and some of the bugs and things like this. So we thought this net was a real opportunity, both visually as a beautiful piece of design, but in many ways super functional. The client can only pay for so much interior space. That's expensive. Architecture is expensive. But a net is extremely cheap. And Cyprus has absolutely beautiful weather. So just by simply covering it, protecting people from the sun, allowing the breezes to come through, you increase the square meters of the building, and you increase the amount of space you can have to be in, to hang out, and for the client to treat as program. You can see the net here. We spent a long time finding ones that didn't look terrible. You can see here kind of what it looked like with everything else removed in section. And I'll come back to the net in a bit, but I also want to talk about how we thought about programming. Again, it wasn't about programming buildings per se. It was about programming the spaces themselves. And that way of programming often was about thinking about the traditional agriculture there. So whether it was a building or not, there was an idea that you could think of how vegetables were grown in the area. You could think of how cooking was done. There was a place to eat. There was a place for performance. There was a historic church. Animals and children's play spaces were mixed. So this way of programming became less about building and about the space. And where the buildings were just happened to be taken by what the space programming was, not the programming of the building. And it leads to a series of spaces like this. So you can see it forms more traditional looking outdoor spaces, places for performance, place to maybe show a video. And then also in the center was this, what is simply just, it's just a traditional square. We're not inventing anything here. Just a large open square that you could have a big performance. You could do something crazy, you could leave it blank, it could be just a fountain, but we intentionally left it open so that this could change, much like the spaces can change, this space can change daily. So you can see how the landscape really comes in and has an opportunity to almost go under the net, and the net and the buildings become this kind of cohesive bit, but in some ways almost looks a bit like a collage or a mosaic if you're in my study group this week. Okay, on visually organized space. This starts to get a bit abstract here for a second and a bit futuristic, so tolerate me. But the idea of visually organized space, all of us take it for granted. Space has always had to be visually organized in some form. When you walk down the street, you need to know there's a sidewalk, you need to know there's a curb, and you need to see there's a road. You always need to see it. The car needs to be able to see that that is for them, and this sidewalk is for me, the person walking. So space has always been visually defined. Same with the interiors of a building. But you could argue that that is something we can start to question, which we have with some of our research we've been doing at the office. And in some ways, for me, this goes back actually really historical. This is a beautiful Anoli map. If you don't know what this is, find out. But it's a beautiful old map of the city of Rome that doesn't draw a distinction between courtyards or street spaces and things like this. Everything is just either open space or kind of the foundation of buildings, shall we say. So it gets a lot more blurry. And this is maybe what we can return to as technology starts to emerge, and something we can dream about. And also, again, relating to the work we've been doing this week for anyone who's taking part in the workshop, also has to do with modernist space and how that can evolve. So the first project, maybe we explored this, was actually 10 years ago, called Chip City. And actually, Bjarke Ingels has since done a very nice project with it in collaboration with Audi. But the idea was quite simple. With all of us most of us having some kind of smartphone, iPhone, HTC, the idea that signage is maybe unnecessary. So when I drive along the freeway, I could look at the landscape more and the roadway signs less. Also makes it so in a place like Paris, I wouldn't have to be cluttered with 50 million signs telling me which way is the Louvre or which way is this or that. I could just enjoy Paris much more. Also in the airport, I wouldn't have to be cluttered with large signs telling everyone where the flights are. And in Tokyo, the advertising could go away and we could have much more of a clean thing. But I have to say, in this reality, I prefer the Tokyo as it is now as opposed to this very boring looking Tokyo. And maybe in the future, the cities could function more like this. Roads, sidewalks, bikeways, buildings, all become much blurrier. Okay, on another project that we explored in a very different way, we did this at the scale of the building. We did this with a collaboration with the Netherlands Architecture Institute and the National Library Institute. And we looked at the future of the library. If you know librarians, or you know people who like books, they're very scared. People don't know what to do with libraries. Much of us younger folks just do everything on the web, have no need to go to the library, so they wonder what the library will be. And they asked us to help them think about it. And we thought maybe the library could be more like this. I really like libraries. I like books. I'm old enough that I do remember an era where I did have to go to the library, unlike now maybe. So I still enjoy the library, but in many ways, parts of the spaces are totally boring and awful because they're static, they're not exciting. When I think about libraries, what I like is the book itself and the knowledge. And when I think about how I like to learn with a book, I'd like to do it much more in like a cafe, in a social experience, and not in such a static experience as you see here. And another reality is the changing of the reality of libraries already. This is a library by a famous Dutch architect, Rem Koolhaas. If you don't know who he is, well, okay, no comment. But you can see here, the lesson learned is this is where all the computers are, and this is the books. One guy, and every desk is filled with people waiting. So the nature of libraries is changing. Technology is changing. But in reality, it's all the same. It's just now, instead of reading it on paper, we read it on a screen. And maybe the idea of libraries can change. There's a lot of places to learn these days. There's language schools, there's places to print books. There's all sorts of things that maybe could come into the library and be less of a library in a classic way, which was a storage of books, and maybe just be a center of knowledge. But the core idea is RFID technology, which I'm not going to try and explain, but is basically what we all use if you want to get on a metro, or if you try and steal clothes from the mall. It lets you know it's probably in most of your pockets. But this technology allows it to trace the movement of things. But this allows it that maybe with our smartphones or another device that you could pick up, we don't have to visually organize the library anymore. And this can make the spatial experience extremely different. Classically, for those of you who remember this experience, you had to walk in basically a security gate, go to a catalog, which is paper when I was a child, now it's a computer, Then you have to go down the aisles until you find the right space with this incredibly complex system that no one really understands, and then you find the book. But in the future, it maybe could be different. Maybe you could just walk in, you don't have to worry about a security check, you find the book you like, maybe you see a friend outside, you go back out to see them, then maybe you go get your other book, and maybe you continue kind of bouncing your way. It can be a much more free experience. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be total chaos. In reality, with what we're proposing, can still be a very standard 90-degree layout. That's quite possible and no problem. But we think it allows the flexibility to do something a bit more free. This would require kind of a redesigning of the shelf as well. And at the core of this, because some of these images are pretty crazy, it's about this. When I think of a great day with a book, it's like this. But why does it just have to be in a park? Why can't it be inside of a building? I'll say thank you, and it's a pleasure. I'd be happy to talk to anyone outside after the lecture and beyond this. Much appreciated.